Jesus in My Life, episode 12.
I say it this way, this is my punchline, is God didn't do COVID to me, he did it for me. And because I needed to be on my back completely still, and the only posture that I had was looking up, because it was like the Lord's forced rest upon me, and he needed to deal with me, not in a bad way, he just needed to deal with me. I call it like his severe mercy.
Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome, everybody. We have a very special episode for you as we return to a more personal testimony today, as I have my co-host Rob share about a life and death situation that he faced. What was it, a year ago?
It was over a year ago now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over a year ago.
And it's kind of cool to be on this side of the mic, Jack.
Yes,
for our listeners to get to know each of us in this way. So pretty cool.
Yeah, at our studio, me and Rob always sit on one side and our guest sits on the other. And so today Rob's on the other side.
I'm on the other side.
So we all just went through something that had never happened in our lifetime, right? A pandemic, and our lives were all significantly affected, whether we got the disease or not. Mm-hmm. And we had to put our lives on pause. The economy changed, our work situations changed, our church gatherings changed. Everything was affected. Mm. But for a select few of people, COVID was life and death. Yes. Right? Rob was one of those people who almost died because of COVID. And so we're going to share that with you guys today. Well, Rob is going to share it. Mm-hmm. And Rob, how about we start where were you at with the whole COVID thing, prior to contracting it? What happened after?
So to answer that question, Jack, I would say, like everybody, when COVID hit initially, it was something that caught everybody by surprise, and we weren't really sure. And all the world really took drastic measures to prevent this. And looking back, in the rearview mirror of that time, okay, this is a serious thing. And then as time went on, I began to see, like, it seems that there are people who are really being affected by this, some people not so much, and then some not at all. And so navigating through that, I never concluded that this was something made up or something that was just a scare tactic. I mean, I saw firsthand that this was something actually serious. And as I think back to my personal story as it relates to COVID, I thought that I was immune to getting any kind of severe version of COVID-19. And
do you think that was because everybody that you knew that had it had such a mild case of it?
Initially, it was probably that. But then, close people that I would hear stories, some of these people had more severe cases. A few of them even died. So, trying to navigate that all through my mind and I would say overall, and this applies to not just me, but I would say those in my home, my family, we kind of took the approach like we're going to continue our lives, and as best as possible through all of this, not alter much of what, we were doing, what we did. And, with all the political stuff that went down and just the polarization of it, and just the relational angst that took place. And as I look back, we tried as best we could to, if I could say, take on the person of Christ in terms of how we deal with it and how we deal with people. And so, but yeah, as I think back to it, to fully answer your question, I knew that it was real. I would say that there was some thought that I was immune to it. And certainly to where my story really applies, I didn't think I would have to go through the level of severity of what I went through.
So What happened? How did you get COVID?
So my wife had it, she got it. And then soon after that, a couple of days later, I had come down with it. Initially thought it was an allergy attack. Just, feeling like a pretty bad cold initially. And watching my wife go through that, hit her really hard, like 2 days. But she works remote, and I'd be sitting on the couch and kind of watching her because I was ill also, starting to feel ill, watching her go through the ups and downs of navigating through it. And just like clockwork, I mean, she really took a very logical approach to how to best heal from this. And after 10 days, she was totally perfectly back to normal. Now, so all the things that my wife was doing, what she was eating, the medications that she was taking over the counter, I was doing the same thing. And I thought, well, I'll just keep doing that because I see obviously my wife getting better. And so I'll just do that. But not realizing that actually I was getting worse. And even to the point where it was a chore getting up from the couch to use the restroom, which was not, we were in a small house at the time. And, it wasn't like a big house on the other side of the corner of the house. It was just, down the hallway. And I was beginning to feel, very much like just walking to the restroom felt like running a marathon.
Wow.
And just using the restroom was becoming a real exhaustive thing. And that started to concern me. I was starting to feel like there's something more going on in me. And then in time, my breathing really became the issue.
You had mentioned in the past to me that you kind of were expecting to be on this. Your wife got it first.
Yes.
And you were just, progressing, counting your days. Okay, by day 8, by day 9, I'll be better because she started feeling better at day 9.
That's right.
The fact is you were actually getting way significantly worse.
Yeah.
And I know this is kind of silly, but there's this like stereotype in our culture where a woman gets sick and they just power through it, and men are like over exaggerating and totally paralyzed by a cold, right?
Right.
Did that play a factor in your like, well, I'm probably better off than I think. I'm just kind of not being tough enough with the sickness. Did that was there anything like that playing in your mind?
There was totally a lot of that for sure. And watching my wife get better, I wasn't really communicating with her how I was getting worse. And I look back at that and I when I've shared this story, I say that part of the issue became my male stubbornness.
Okay.
Because that scenario that you just gave, Jack, is a normal scenario in so many marriages, and in mine included. And so I was probably giving a false report of how I was feeling. I wasn't really communicating fully, and especially when it came to some of the issues of breathing. That didn't come until 3 or 4 days later, but I knew something was going on. I knew that this was beyond just a bad cold or a flu. And absolutely at that point knew that it was COVID, but thought I was going to get through it. And just like my wife, in 10 days, I was going to be fine after 10 days too. And so, yeah, to answer your question, for sure, that was a big part of it. That I'll just plow through it and not burden her. And it got to the place really so much so that because Kara had done so much better, she had been, well, her thing was I needed to get out of the house because Rob is just so sick. And then at this point, my other son had gotten COVID as well, my youngest son. And so she just wanted to get away. So she went to San Diego to go visit her friend. And I was giving her reports. Hey, I'm doing better today. Right. But then a couple hours later, not feeling better, and communicating that with her. And then at this point we were starting to say, well, we probably should make an appointment. Like when I get back, this is what Kara was suggesting. And that's kind of what I needed. I needed a kick in the pants,
Mm-hmm.
And And I was okay with that because I wasn't getting better. I was feeling worse and I wanted to get better. So when she came back from San Diego, the first thing that she said to me when she walked through the door was, wow, your breathing is bad. And Jack, that was the beginning of, it was like an alert for me. Like, Rob, you can't just plow through this. Like, I needed my wife to tell me that so that I could take action.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of times we use our wives to gauge whether we're being tough or not.
Yeah.
Right. And so when our wives are like, oh, you're definitely bad, then we're like, okay, then I must be. Right. We're looking for that validation. And we so often want to be tough for them. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So we suck it up and just endure when we should have been asking for help a long time.
That's right.
Prior.
So when she said that, your breathing is bad, we had already made an appointment to see the doctor the next day. And so when she came home, it was going to be 24 hours later for me to have that meeting the doctor. And she was really concerned. I wouldn't say that I was concerned at that point at her level, but she was really scared. And so she was even saying, hey, I don't think you should sleep tonight. That's what she said.
She didn't think you'd wake up or something?
Well, that or she didn't want me stop breathing in the middle of the night,
yeah.
right? Like that was a big thing. And I said, well, I'll just remain on the couch upright because that was my posture for, about 2 weeks. That night she slept in the bed and then I slept on the couch. And then in the morning, obviously the situation hadn't gotten any better. My breathing was still an issue. She noticed it. And so she took me to the hospital. And
this is the ER?
The ER.
Okay.
Yeah, we went to the ER. And this was, because at the time you had to schedule that. Right? Yep. You couldn't just show up. So that was my ER scheduled time. And Jack, this is the thing that was really, really impactful for me is when I got out of the car to walk to the ER door, I would say was probably maybe at the most 50 feet. And when I got out of the car, the nurses had to come assist me and just walk with me. And at about 25 feet halfway, I couldn't go any further. In fact, I looked at the doctors and I said, I can't go any further. I mean, at that point, I felt like I had ran 3 marathons.
Wow.
And my breathing was so labored. I didn't feel like I was going to pass out or anything or anything like that, but I just couldn't go anymore. And at that point, the nurses ran and grabbed me a wheelchair and they immediately put oxygen on me, not knowing what was really happening inside of me, right? Just knowing that there's obviously something wrong.
Yep.
And then they wheeled me into the room and then there for 3.5 hours did testing, x-ray, all of that. And the doctor had consulted me after all that, and my wife obviously being there too. And he said to me, almost like, I can't even believe you're here. Now that got my attention, of course, right? Like, I can't believe that you're even here talking to me because I want to give you the current state of where you're at physically. And so I'll give you the layman terms. I looked at my x-rays and the doctor said, and I could tell that he wasn't embellishing it at all. Like he looked at my x-rays and he said, this is the worst x-ray I've seen in a chest for the last year and a half.
Wow. So basically you were the worst COVID case he had seen.
He had seen. Yeah. And I validated that. I trusted him. I believed him, but I validated it because I knew what I was feeling. And then he said, normal oxygen levels should be 90% and above. Your oxygen levels right now, as I'm talking to you, is in the 60 percentile. And he was being very serious, like, how come we didn't call sooner?
Yeah.
How come we didn't come in sooner? And I kind of gave him a quick version of that and answer. And so at that point, he looked at both Karen and I and he said, minimum amount of time that you'll be in the hospital will be a month.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Wow.
And immediately Kara was in tears. That's not what we expected. That wasn't the results that we thought. And he basically said, you need to go to Kara, you need to go grab his stuff and you'll be living here for a month minimum.
You would be living there for a month. She wasn't even allowed to come see you the quarantine zone, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So you get wheeled into the special COVID quarantine area at this point?
Yes. Get wheeled in and it wasn't really too busy. But as I was sitting there in my wheelchair, I would admit that I was asking the Lord some questions. You know, what's going on? Why is this happening?
Yeah.
What does this mean moving forward? And then as I got wheeled into a room, Kara actually got to be with me in that emergency room. And I could sense that there was a lot of concern from the nurses that would walk in and the doctors while they were waiting for my main room. And, you know, I remember like at that point when all the stuff got connected to me and, you know, got the IV and all the things and the machines that were, you know, connected and, you know, with pulse and all that. At that point, I remember saying a prayer in my heart and I said, Lord, would you allow this cup to pass? Ironically, it was the week of Holy Week so it was the Sunday before Easter. Okay. This was all on Monday. And I had specifically got admitted into the hospital on that Monday at 3 p.m. And so that was just that little short prayer that I had in my heart. Didn't say it out loud. And I don't think that was necessarily ironic in terms of the week that was going to, that I was going to embark upon.
Yeah. That's the same week that Jesus said those very words, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they finally got me a room, wheeled me in. And at that point, Karen and I said our goodbyes. And it was really odd as I think back to that time.
Were you thinking this could possibly be the last time I see my wife?
Jack, to answer the question, I felt that my wife was in that space.
Okay.
But I wasn't. That's not to say that my faith was, you know, like 100%. Yeah. That's not to say that I, you know, we're going to get through this. It was nothing like that. It was just, I could tell that there was a lot of fear in my wife's eyes when we had to say bye, because, you know, that was basically the last time. I mean, in our mind, it was see you in a month.
Yep.
So
at best,
minimum, you know? And so when I got admitted into my room, immediately based on the doctor's prognosis and prescription for me was to have me not be on the phone, not even move my head, because that was too much energy. That would affect my oxygen and my breathing.
Okay.
And that absolutely was validated.
Okay.
Yeah, I was feeling that very, very much so. So I had to just be in one spot, you know, the minute I was, you know, and had to call for the nurses to assist me in adjusting the bed and et cetera. No going to the restroom, not moving. Yeah. So you can imagine how difficult that was.
I can't. Well, I mean, I guess I can. I had open heart surgery 6 months ago. And, you know, coming out of surgery in the ICU, you can't do much yourself.
Right.
But nothing to the level that you were at. Because, I mean, when I came out of surgery, I was pumped full of painkillers and everything else. I hardly remember the time.
Sure.
Right. You weren't on anything like that.
No.
You were experiencing it. You were fully cognizant at the time. Like, it must have been a challenge all day long doing nothing. Just you, the staff, and God.
That's it. Yeah. And it was, you know, I'll get kind of to the punchline here on this is, you know, there were a lot of other things that were happening behind the scenes even before I had COVID. And, you know, I lead a church. And so that brings a lot of its own stresses and challenges.
Yeah.
But also exhilarating excitement and right. So I love what I do, but leading a church is not easy. And so it was as if the Lord was in my life at that time. I say it this way, this is my punchline, is God didn't do COVID to me, he did it for me. And because I needed to be on my back completely still, and the only posture that I had was looking up, because it was like the Lord's forced rest upon me, and he needed to deal with me, not in a bad way, he just needed to deal with me. I call it like his severe mercy. And it was the only way that my attention was going to be drawn in this way.
It can do anything, right? You couldn't spend time on your phone.
No.
You couldn't call anybody. It was mandatory alone time with God.
Yeah. Like a timeout with God. Like a timeout. And even as I say that, I don't want any of the listeners to think that was a negative thing. Actually, like I said, it was something that needed to happen at that time. And so to answer your question and to address it is absolutely, it was very, very specific, intentional, focused time with God for sure.
Were you at least allowed to listen to worship music and stuff like that?
Yeah. So at that time, of course, I had access to my phone.
Yeah.
And I could text. So I was texting a lot, and people were texting me, video downloads of, sermons that could be encouraging, or, passages of scripture, or, worship songs. So that's pretty much what I spent my time doing, especially listening to worship music at that time. A lot of music in that season really ministered to me in the middle of the night, right? Because I was woken up by nurses every 2 hours, and and
I know what that's
probably
like.
relate to that, yeah. And so, there no such thing as good sleep, right? So, but that was okay. Got to really meet a lot of cool people in terms of the nurses and the doctors and the specialists. Yeah, I look back and I'm like, I know God did COVID for me for sure. It was His grace.
Wow. So you're having, in a sense, your body is thrashed, but your spirit is thriving in that moment.
Yeah, I just got goosebumps when you said that. That's a great description. And, some people have asked me this question, did you ever feel like this was the end for you? And I wasn't minimizing it at this point, right? A couple days in now. I wasn't minimizing it. I knew that I was in a very serious condition, a situation that it was really like minute by minute. And in fact, the room that I was in, I was the only one in the COVID unit that I didn't have a roommate. I was completely quarantined alone. And later would find out just the notices that were on outside my door, it was pretty severe. So I wasn't naive, is what I'm saying. I wasn't naive. But I remember a couple moments in the middle of the night, just me and God, and not able to sleep because you're hearing a lot of noises and beeps, and and you got things connected to you, and you're not really able to settle in and rest and all that. And on 2 occasions, I remember just kind of whispering to the Lord, I don't think you're done with me yet, but if you are, I'm content. I remember saying that 2 times. And I wouldn't say that I got the answer written in the ceiling or the sky, but just my spirit, as you said, my spirit was thriving. I felt at peace with that. Truly didn't feel like this was the end, because I didn't feel like I was knocking on death's door. Physically, I didn't feel that. Truly, like even with all the stuff that was happening in me, the only real pain that I felt was in my lungs.
Okay.
It's just the breathing part, but everything else I felt fine.
But you still had a fever and everything else, right?
I had a fever. Yeah. I had a fever that was, was in the, it fluctuated between 102.5 to 103.
Wow.
And by the time I got in the hospital, it was that for like 2 weeks.
Okay.
Again, that male stubbornness, right? That that kind of like my body was indicating help and need some help, and wouldn't say ignored it, just wanted to, tough it out. But yeah, so that had continued in the hospital, and it was, my fever was definitely fluctuating, even at this point, a few days in to being in the hospital.
So what's happening? You're in the hospital for a few days. It's Easter week. Tell me how are you progressing? What are the doctors telling you?
Mm-hmm. So I got admitted at 3 p.m. on that Monday. Wednesday morning around 10 a.m., suddenly my alarms went off in my room. And it was a frantic morning. Suddenly, nurses were running in and out. Specialists were consulting outside my door. I could see through the window there. Specialists were consulting with doctors. And my main doctor came in and said, Rob, we have a very serious situation right now. Your oxygen levels are not recovering and your heart levels are dropping. Obviously tied hand in hand there. And at this point, what we have to do is rush you to ICU and we have to put a ventilator into you.
And this is at the point where they knew that wasn't a good course of action because, people who were on ventilators didn't have a high survival rate, right?
That's correct.
Like this isn't early on where they were putting everybody on it. It was like last resort, right?
It was last resort, and they didn't determine whether you were healthy or not, or age, or anything. That was just kind of the go-to. And yeah, you're right. The chances of coming out of that were going to be slim. And my doctor was so good, and my doctor was graciously handed to me by God. He was a godsend, a believer in Christ, and he was such an encouragement. He'd always walk into my room, Reverend Robbie, and he was just such a bright, space of joy. And so he and I got to know each other pretty well at this point. This was Wednesday now, and he had to tell me this news. And my doctor was so good about communicating with my wife everything that was happening with me. And so I was, at this point, I just felt like I just need to get better. And I don't even remember how I answered, what do you want to do when the doctor presented this to me? I did say, please let my wife know what's happening. And so he called, told my wife, and in tears, my wife said, is there anything else that we can do? I obviously didn't know that this conversation was taking place. And the doctor said, well, that's your choice. But at this point, we have no other options. There was the doctor's professional opinion that this was the only resort. But because my doctor was a believer, he said, but what we can do is storm heaven with our prayers. So this was the new diagnosis. Prayer. And joyfully, my wife said, okay. And the doctor said to her, we'll have to reevaluate this in the morning.
Okay. So they extended the diagnosis. They were like, we can wait until maybe the morning at the most.
Yeah, at the most.
Okay.
Yes. So obviously news went out. News to our friends, to our family, to our church family. I mean, I could say, Jack, that the news spread really quick. Even people that I didn't even know, because everybody was contacting their network. And we have friends, missionary friends. We have people who live in different parts of the world, and they were getting the news as well. And so the word was spreading across the globe. And I remember that night, this was Wednesday evening, I remember getting a Facebook text message from somebody in Idaho. Hey, you don't know who I am, but I heard about your condition. We're praying for you as a church. Wow. So this was what was happening.
Yes, yes.
And the news was spreading quick that we needed to pray. Well, because the doctor said, let's storm heaven with our prayers. Our youth group that night, this was Wednesday night, had their meeting. And the whole time they'd prayed for me. It was a 2.5 hour youth group night of praying and worshiping. And God was giving visions to the students. And this was, of course, communicated to me later, but that was what was happening. So it was an immediate, it was what I would call not a 911, but I call it a 711,
Yeah.
right? 7 being God's perfect number in the physical and spiritual. And it was so amazing to see. What's crazy about that, Jack, was that night, Wednesday night, my fever finally broke. And I remember feeling, right? Like when you have a fever,
Yeah.
and you just all of a sudden you're it's like it almost just washes over you, and now you feel not 100%, but you know the fever's gone.
Yes.
I remember having that feeling that night, and it didn't mean that I was gonna go do jumping jacks or go run around the hospital.
Yep.
But it just I felt I was feeling better. So now it's Thursday morning, and for the first time I'm out of my bed. I was able to get out of the bed on Thursday morning.
This is without help.
Without any help. I didn't let the nurses know. I got out because I was feeling better.
Okay.
Thursday morning. Of course, I got all the wires connected to me,
Yeah.
all of that. And at this point, they had elevated the amount of oxygen through my nose.
Yeah.
It was the level, just the one level down from being ventilated.
Okay.
And so it was like a whole new day that Thursday morning. So much so that I started eating. And at this point, it had been almost 3 weeks since I couldn't eat anything. And so I was eating, and, they brought breakfast, all the days before that. Monday, I just maybe snack a little bit, but just couldn't eat. And then I'm having breakfast. I'm eating like I'm asking for more. I mean, who thought that the hospital food would ever be like a delicatessen? It was for me. And my body was like, it's time to eat. It's time to eat. And I was. It was crazy.
That's when you know your body's getting mended, right?
Yes.
When you get your appetite back.
Yeah.
So are you thinking like, what's going on? What happened? Are you putting the dots together yet at this point? Or not?
I'm asking the question, what is happening?
Yeah.
Because I feel a lot better.
Yeah.
But again, at the same time, understanding the condition, right? It wasn't 100%, but I was definitely feeling better. I mean, I could say that for 3 weeks, I was feeling much better after the 3 weeks of all of this. Then at that point, the doctor comes into my room, and he's like a deer in headlights. He's looking at me. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I feel much better." And he kind of had to keep it real for me. Now, I had 3 doctors. I mentioned my main doctor being a believer, and my other 2 doctors not. They were not. So this was another doctor, and he was shocked to see me out of my bed eating and looking at my oxygen levels, and they were okay. And I just told the doctor, I'm feeling a lot better today. And he asked me, almost pinned me down. He's like, "Well, what happened? What did you do?" And I said to him, "It's the prayer of God. It's the prayers of God's people."
What was his reaction to that?
Well, he kind of dismissed that, of course. He's like, "Well, but really, what happened?" And I said, "No, seriously, doctor, when we got the news about my condition last night, or yesterday afternoon, actually, we told everybody to pray. And so everybody is and has been. And the only explanation I can give, doctor, is that God's answering our prayers." And, he dismissed that.
Yeah.
He didn't want to tell me more. He didn't say any of that, but just dismissed it. And I knew in my heart what was truly happening. It was a miracle.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so obviously this was now Thursday, and throughout the day I was progressively getting better. So much so that my main doctor came in and said, "Reverend Robbie, the prayers of God's people, it works." He was validating that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the one that gave the prescription to storm heaven with our prayers.
Yeah. Best medicine.
Best medicine. Yes. And, I remember that afternoon tearfully being with him, and him in tears, and here now just a days before Easter, just amazing. And so my doctor was so encouraging. Well, we're going to continue to pray, and I validated. I said, yes, I know that, we're not out of the woods. We're going to continue to pray. And so when my doctor came in, he said, "Okay, what we need to do, since you are feeling better, is we need to start rehabbing you. We got to start having you walk around, do laps, and see what happens." And that was literally, I remember that when I got out of my bed, well, I got out of the seat at that point, and I had to have a nurse assist me because, being on my back for a while now, and including the time in my house, being on the couch, pretty much that's where I lived. This was the first time where I was going to exert, more energy than the last couple of weeks. And I didn't know how that was going to go. And, it was like almost having to teach myself to walk again. It was really awkward and challenging. And I had to take a few steps and take a few breaks and then walk again and then walk again. And I was feeling great, and feeling better. And again, I wasn't running. I was just walking slowly. And then they put me back in the room and did that again Thursday evening, and then did the same thing again on Friday. And every single day I was feeling better.
So you're starting to feel real good. Like what's the prognosis now? I mean, you started with, you're going to be in here a minimum of 30 days. What's it looking like now?
Jack, come Friday into Saturday, my doctor said it would be not impossible for you to leave and be discharged. You're not out of the woods yet, but things are looking really up. If you would be out of here by Easter, it would truly be a miracle. So my goal at that point was to leave by Easter.
Yeah.
Lord, get me out of here by Easter.
Yeah.
That would be a great resurrection, right?
Yeah.
And again, on Sunday, that was Resurrection Sunday, my wife got to come in and we got to have an Easter dinner together.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was the first time in that amount of time that I really hadn't seen her physically. And the doctor came in that day and got to meet my wife and, and said, things are looking really good. Things are really good. We're going to shoot for tomorrow, Monday.
Okay.
And I remember on Monday morning, one of my doctors came in and said, we're going to disconnect all of the wiring and the system, and you're just going to rehab and walk without it and see how your body responds. Jack, I walked around several times and I sat back down. They put the monitor back on me and my oxygen levels were at a good, manageable place. And then a couple hours later, the doctor said, you're leaving today. So I was admitted on Monday at 3 p.m. I was literally discharged on that next Monday at 3 p.m.
No
exactly
way.
7 days.
Exactly 7 days.
Exactly.
Only
7
God.
days.
Only God, right? Only God.
Only God.
Yeah. And, I want to share with our audience, like, I got to witness this firsthand. Me and Rob, we do ministry together. And this man who was supposed to be in the hospital for 30 days, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 30 days later, you were playing softball.
That's exactly right. I was.
You were playing softball. Like, it was unbelievable, the recovery time, right? Like, people who were in the hospital for COVID, the recovery time is weeks, months, right? They told you it was going to take you a long time to get back to normal. Yeah. God said, no, you're on my timeline, son.
That's right. That's right.
You're playing softball.
Only God.
Only God. Amen. Only God. So tell me one key takeaway from this experience. Like, what would you want to communicate to our audience about this?
I would say, don't underestimate the work of what God wants to do in your life. And, looking back, I did some battling in the spirit, if I can say it that way, in the evening times, into the night times when I was really struggling with things and asking questions and all of that, and realizing that this was not something that the enemy was doing to me. It was something that God was allowing for me, because, man, I look back at that and it reset my heart, my life, my breathing, my perspective on Him, and to be grateful for every single minute of the day that God gives. And so I would say for any of our listeners that maybe you are looking for a miracle or you're looking for God to step into a situation, don't underestimate how God answers your prayer by giving you what you think you don't need, but actually an opportunity to draw closer to you in relationship and to know His love deeper and to know His grace and His mercy.
Well, thank you for sharing that powerful story with us, Rob. I know it's ministered to me. God's used it to confirm so many things in my own life as well. And having gone through a life and death situation myself 6 months ago with open heart surgery, I can say like you did, because of my relationship with Jesus, I could say, I don't think you're done with me yet, but if you are, I'm okay. Because if you take me home, I'm just going to go get to be with you. And that's amazing. Right. And so I'm so grateful for that. That ability to be in the face of death and not necessarily be scared of it.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, thank you for being on the show with me today. And as a reminder to everybody, our foundation scripture is Luke 8:39, with a man who's been delivered from a demon, and he wants to follow Jesus, and Jesus tells him no. He wants him to go back to his family and tell them what God has done in his life. And this man goes out, and wherever he is in this town that he's in, not even with his family, like, he goes and tells everybody what Jesus has done. And that's what Rob did today. He shared how God used COVID in his life and how God miraculously delivered him from it. And so I want to encourage everyone that's listening today, go share your Jesus story. It's powerful and people need to hear it. So thank you for being with us today, and we'll catch you next week.
Amen. Thanks a lot. See you guys later.
And now a reflection on today's interview. One thing I love about Rob's story is how in line it is with Romans 8:28 through 29. And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. You see, this incident with COVID for Rob was life-threatening. Many of us, his close friends, thought there was a chance that he might pass away. But God used it mightily in the lives of the people that Rob pastors over, and very specifically in the life of Rob himself. Rob came out of COVID more conformed to the image of Jesus than before COVID. I love that Rob could have such a good perspective on such a difficult trial that he went through, that he could see God's hand in it, God's mercy in it, God's love in it. And we all got to witness the power of God to heal a man through it. Our faiths were strengthened through his experience, and his relationship with Jesus went to the next level. And so he can say with confidence that God used it for good in his life. And that's not always an easy perspective to take. But if you are in Christ, nothing that happens to you is wasted, is thrown away, is for no reason at all. God does not will evil for his children. But when it's something that is related to this broken world happens to us, we can be like Joseph when he told his brothers in Genesis 50, verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Have a blessed week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.